Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which is absolutely still wrapped in a pandemic. Um, there are big chunks of the world that haven't seen one shot, let alone been vaccinated fully. It's a human heated planet, as we've explored here interminably, as I've written about for 35 years. It's a planet with a sort of an infodemic is the early stages of online communication. We're still in the early days of this new fundamental way to connect and confuse play out. And it's really hard to get a grasp sometimes on what's real. We're surrounded by spin. We all have our predispositions. I have confirmation bias, just like everyone else. I've done shows in the early days of the pandemic on the probable, would seem to me like obvious biological, ecological origins of the virus that caused this pandemic. There clearly are other options. The Wuhan
Mhm.
lab in the area where the virus originated is still not off the list. But we have these spasms of um, spin that come and go and come again and intensify. Right now, we're in the middle of another one. The Wall Street Journal, a couple of really good reporters, Michael Gordon, who was at the New York Times, you know, have come up with a new angle. There was they got a hold of an update to the the National Intelligence Assessment of the Pandemic Origins that comes from Energy Department laboratories that reportedly tweaks the language around the lab origin in ways that have spun way out of control. And I thought it would be good to do what I call a watchwords episode of this um, webcast. Watchwords is a series I've been doing about words, phrases that too often confuse rather than clarify. Words like likely, words like low confidence, words like just get spun away. Words on climatological questions like collapse, the collapse of an ice sheet. What do we mean when you say that? And I've just found, both as a journalist and as a communicator now through Columbia Climate School, I really try to encourage everyone to pause before they click, to think about the way words can be misinterpreted, to look at the fundamental, to backtrack. When the national intelligence apparatus says low confidence or likely, what does it mean by those things? What's the difference between likelihood and confidence? Those are two different ways of looking at problems. And I immediately thought of reaching out to Rod Schoonover, who's lived this. He was at office of the ODNI, the Consolidating Intelligence Advisory Group that links everything, CIA and all the others, National Security Council together. And he has written some of these assessments before. He left government and now is a consultant and teaching. You'll learn more just quickly about his background. And he's been on the show many times to talk about what we know and don't know about big risks from the invasion of Ukraine to pandemic threats and climate change. And Rod, it's great to have you pop up here to try to help us navigate the
Great.
language and the spin around this issue. So
Yeah.
when you picked up the Wall Street Journal or went to the website over the weekend, what was your first thought?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because this has been an issue in the background, in my world for quite some time. I know the people still working on these issues in the intelligence community. Yeah, I think it's, of course, reading the headline, I was like, huh, wow, this is something. This is, I thought, surprising. Um, uh, and of course, I immediately started to read the article.
Right,
Um, it's like, well, hold on, where's the news here?
right.
And of course, I jumped right on the low confidence language, but that's it's not page 23 that it comes in, but it's down way down at the end.
Right. Yeah. But let's just kind of walk through it a little bit here, just
Yeah.
briefly. Then we'll get back to your, what you used to do. So
Yeah.
lab leak, most likely, whatever
Most likely.
right, and that's a phrase that also was used by in quotes in October in the Wall Street Journal coverage of a Republican report. But here
Right.
it's not in quotes. Most likely origin is a lab leak. Energy Department now says. Okay, so then we go down into the meat and mashed potatoes here.
Yeah.
Let's see. The Energy Department has concluded that the pandemic most likely arose from a laboratory leak, according to a classified intelligence report. And then, of course, you would want to know, okay, what's the report?
Right.
And this is a secondary, it's an update to this report.
Right. It's an update to the 2021.
Right.
Report.
Theoretically, it's a still classified update to this report.
Yeah, this would be an unclassified derivative of the classified assessment.
Right. So let's go back to this story here. The Energy Department now joins the FBI in saying the virus likely spread via a mishap at a Chinese lab. 4 other agencies still judge that it was likely the result of natural transmission. 2 are undecided, but let's pay a lot of attention to this one.
Right.
And then we get to, it's significant because the Energy Department, when I first was reading it, I was going, wait a minute, Energy Department? And then, of course, I remembered the national laboratories, which do biological work too, are
sure
part of that. But then here we go. So here, the Energy Department made its judgment with low confidence. How can something be likely and low confidence at the same time?
Right, because they're 2 different things, right? And so low confidence is really talking not about the likelihood that something in the real world happened or didn't. It's referring to the quality of information that the analysts are drawing from. And so those are quite distinct. And both are important for different reasons. But one of the things that the intelligence community does a very good job of is showing its work. How did it arrive at a certain conclusion, and how good do they feel about that conclusion? And that's right, low confidence, which generally means we're talking about very threadbare information. And
let me just show you. And here,
yes.
Let's show you what I like this. Just like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as you say,
Right.
Define your terms, right? Before you walk into a room, before you have to hatch out with other agencies or the like. And so here, the IC is the intelligence community. This was this document. It's called A Consumer's Guide to National Intelligence. I feel like as a consumer, as a journalist, certainly anyone would be. So a low confidence level generally indicates that the information used in the analysis is scant. Whoops, I just lost it. Questionable.
Fragmented.
Come on, come back. Just had it there. Estimative language. Scant, questionable, fragmented, or that solid analytical conclusions cannot be inferred from the information, or that the intelligence community has significant concerns or problems with the information sources. So that, if I'm writing an article about this, as a journalist, I've played this game right before. I've been a competitive journalist on, like, when Flight 800, 1996, an airplane blew up over Long Island, over the sea, tragically killing 232 people. I was one of the reporters, driving really, really hard to know what the Navy was pulling off the seabed, what the FBI metallurgists were doing, pushing the story, getting the front page thought elevated. But at the same time, I felt beholden to reality, And I think, if I were writing this story, I would kind of want to say, by the way, when these agencies use the phrase low confidence, this is what they mean. But I know why it doesn't end up in the stories.
Yeah.
So tell me, that feels like your history writing this language.
Right. I mean, these are lengthy discussions, right? People really spend a lot of time in the intelligence community on these issues. What degree of confidence can we say this? And so, my old office, the National Intelligence Council, uh, one of its primary roles is really helping bring the different elements of the IC together, talk about points of agreement, talk about points of disagreement, and really interrogate how well do you know these things? How well do you, um, you know, explicitly talking about what is your confidence level? And so I think something that is very important in this story that I haven't seen explicitly written is that, in this update to the previous report, uh, no other agencies who are privy to the same intelligence.
Mhm.
Different intelligence agencies don't have generally better intelligence or worse intelligence. They draw from the same intelligence. The rest, the other intelligence agencies did not change their assessment.
After
Right.
reviewing this, right.
Right. After reviewing. And I think it's really important. Some of the intelligence uh, community elements, they live in a world of threats. Everything, they're ready to pull the trigger and call
Mhm.
something a threat. And yet, this piece of information or whatever it is wasn't compelling enough to even convince them. And so I think, for me, that's there's a meta story that you're kind of digging at is why is this story being presented in this way, um, which doesn't, if I was still in the intelligence community, I'd be aghast at this, right? That how is it that one of the elements of the intelligence community making a very minor update, how is it not just front page news? It's almost certainly going to spur a number of congressional actions. I would be aghast if I was in the intelligence community watching very careful analysis being used this way.
And here we have, I'm showing the follow-up story today. Republicans push for release of COVID lab leak evidence.
Yeah, I mean, there's another page in that assessment that I read this morning that I think it's also important to point out. And it's, I'm going to see if I can find it real quick, because it basically says that the variations in analytic views largely I'm reading off of this, stem from differences in how agencies weigh intelligence reporting and scientific publications. And so, that's kind of a remarkable thing to think about in terms of, you know, there are agencies who may be not weighing the scientific evidence as much as something that is less quality controlled, quite frankly. And so, as a scientist myself, it's stunning to me how the scientific community, the virology community, seems to be not completely, but largely coalescing towards a common view. But yet that doesn't seem to sway at least some in the intelligence community. So, and there's a bigger question, right? Who is the right body in the U.S. government to be making this determination, or in U.S. society? So
Yeah,
there's some
sorry.
questions that maybe the intelligence community isn't really ideally suited or structured to answer.
Tell me a little bit more about what kinds of questions would fall in that category, or what about this feels like makes that a bad fit?
it's not necessarily a bad fit, except very, very rapidly changing circumstances. So, you know, the scientific capacity in the intelligence community is not high. It's not zero. And certainly Department of Energy has a number of scientists who work on classified things, but we should not assume that number is a big number, right? The number of people in the intelligence community who really understand the mechanisms of zoonotic spillover is not very high.
Right.
And so, and when that's true, you know, you may, you know, tend towards more geopolitical, you know, interpretations, and maybe swayed by, you know, circumstantial evidence of, you know, a virus pops up at in this city where there's a BSL-4, right? And so, you know, and that has changed. I mean, basically, the intelligence community has increased its capacity to deal with this, but that's a slow process.
Sure.
And so, you know, when we talk about these agencies, this agency has decided, and this agency has decided that, we should remember, at least it's maybe I'll just make the point, we're talking about a handful of people making these determinations on behalf of these agencies, right? And so there's only a few people in the intelligence community who can really talk about these things. And, you know, if we have, you know, an emergent fungal pathogen that does something like that, then we'll be caught blindsided, you know,
Right.
Which is why I think it's so important for the U.S. government to have really good relationships with the scientific community, because, you know, the IC will never be able to staff itself to, you know, pivot to everything that comes out of the blue. So
this is a really interesting point. You're reminding me again. I mentioned Flight 800. It seems like a weird comparison, but the more I'm listening to you, the more I'm thinking about back to 1996, when I was one of the team that spent months on Long Island listening to the experts, the metallurgists, the analysts. You know, I interviewed the people who were interviewing the witnesses to this crash. There was a bias in the media, and certainly in Washington, toward it had to be terrorism, because 1996, right. There was the Atlanta bombing. There was a Philippine attack on a airliner on the ground, and it just had to be that narrative. It was what I call narrative capture.
Yeah.
And the evidence slowly was coming about that, as we wrote in the Times, and many people still don't believe. It was some complex mix of electromechanical failures and, you know, an empty fuel tank and a hot day, and with a fairly indeterminate and complex, natural, in a way, source of the devastation. It didn't. The FBI was desperate to call it a crime, because that meant they could take over the case from the National Transportation Safety Board. You know, because there was a turf thing too. You know, it has to be a crime. Kallstrom was out there. You know, we have to make it ours. Is that dynamic part of what you're talking about too?
It is. I mean, it's a worldview. It's so I mean, there are a couple pieces to this. One is really the national security is evolving, first of all, and so you know, the historic inability for the security community, including the intelligence community, to conceive of threats with no actors, right? The inability to see climate change as a security issue or pandemics, right? There's a resistance, almost an inertial resistance in moving away from traditional national security, or at least augmenting, right? So national security 1.0 is seeing great powers at war, with each other, and there are actors that we can blame for everything, and this is the predominant worldview throughout the security community, and this is why the lab leak hypothesis got so much traction early on, because I think there is a need to have a bad guy. I think any scientist, would love to see good evidence that would answer this question, and maybe it's out there, in terms of this particular pandemic. But there's also, at the same time, this persistence in bringing things back to geopolitics and international relations, and seeing boogeymen and bad guys. And so it's something I've been watching for quite some time. Hard security versus soft security, et cetera. And that dynamic informs a lot of the judgments that come out of the security community.
Yeah. Can you sort of steelman the counter argument? Like, what's the best case for this not being zoonotic, not being a natural emergence? How does that play out in these discussions?
Well, you would want to see evidence that that these particular labs were working on something that could be a progenitor to SARS-2. You would want to see evidence, either physical evidence, or you would want to hear people talking about it. You would want to be looking for some evidence of a cover-up. That's what an intelligence analyst would want to look at. Right. But also at this point, because the scientific community has spent several years on it, you would also need to find a counter explanation for those findings of, how is it that this very small seafood, this market saw, two, emergences of this outbreak? How do you, and go back and interrogate? There's a couple of really good papers that came out in the last year that, you would have to debunk that as well, I think, to get the lab leak hypothesis, to really make it viable, right? And so at this point, it's not just about finding new information. You also have to say why the scientists are wrong.
Yeah, and I feel I don't have a lot of confidence that anything is going to magically push this past some threshold where clarity will suddenly emerge. I don't know if you have your own sense, having been dug in on this pandemic risk, biological risk issue for a long time, but also on the intelligence apparatus.
Yeah. I think what's really amazing that this Wall Street Journal article shows is how quickly confirmation bias jumps in, right? It's amazing how this, people just, I told you so. And it's, and that's true not just outside of government, there's that inside of government as well. And so, these analysts are people who have their own, human dimensions. So it's a human process. These aren't necessarily, I think it's a good thing that that what the intelligence community thinks and says is still relevant to people. I think that's very valuable. But we can overstate the case. and maybe listening to the intelligence community over the much larger scientific community, we may want to rethink that.
Yeah.
So
I want to bring up another thread here. Let me see. I thought I had it queued up. There's another report that I think has kind of like been undercovered. Let me just get it here. Okay, here we go. This was released in January. It was completed, I think, last summer, but it was a public version that came out. This is the report on looking ahead.
Yeah.
Economic and national security implications of the pandemic through 2026.
Yeah.
Yeah, just released January 14th.
Right. That one came out in April of 2022, and the unclassified derivative, which are showing, just got released, I think, in January.
And it's an enduring and substantial impact going forward.
Yeah.
And one of the issues here, of course, is China is their intransigence on really opening up. The national security implications of this seem really significant going forward in terms of with all the other pressures between China and the United States.
Right.
But this report talks about the enduring poverty, the enduring. Let me get to the poverty graph. It was really disturbing. Are we forgetting? We focus so much on what happened and why and getting the blame right. But are we not looking ahead enough as well?
Well, I mean, clearly, right? I mean, this is a historical problem, with security issues.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's an insignificant issue to find the cause of the pandemic. I think that, right? But it's not the only issue. And I think this is one of the strongest reports to come out of the intelligence community in a few years. And I think it's very compelling. I think the graph you're showing is very thoughtful, in terms, and I think it's an important question that not a lot of people themselves think about. What are the enduring impacts from the pandemic, and what are the global impacts? And I think it's, we so often atomize these events, right? Oh, it's now year 3, and maybe we're post COVID,
right?
But as we saw in, I think the authors of that report were greatly informed by the aftermath of the Spanish flu epidemic, which had lasting repercussions as well. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know the origin of this report, if it was asked for or if they decided to do it, but I think it's, I agree with you that it was undercovered. I don't think I saw any coverage of it. But I think it's insightful in, really highlighting the extreme damage that some populations have experienced, which will, propagate further. I think it's a real good combination of global trends, strategic trends, and scientific trends. So
just a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Are we stuck with this dynamic? I mean, the media, I talk about what I call the front page thought, where the newsroom is set up to do one thing, which is to find and amplify the front page thought. And complexity is not a front page thought.
Right.
A complex, eliminating all the other possibilities argument for a zoonotic, natural emergent version of this pathogen and pandemic is hard to fit into a story that people will pay attention to. Whereas there's so much motivation on both sides, you end up stuck in this. Everyone distorts toward the argument for and against the lab leak because it has all those elements. It has the
Right.
bad guy, good guy element.
Right.
It fits our traditional norms. Are we stuck with this?
The optimist in me says no, humans have agency, and and our institutions can change. But I'd like to see evidence of that. I mean, your time working in journalism, you've seen probably hundreds, if not thousands, of headlines that don't represent the article, right? And what you're talking about is just that, narrative, that thing writ large, right? That
Sure.
the nuggets, right? I mean, the business of the Wall Street Journal is to sell papers, right?
Sure.
And that's the system that we live in. That's the system that will not go away anytime soon. And there is no entity that can shape. No, so maybe we are stuck with it. But on the other hand, we have multiple channels of information, and newspapers are only one. So,
right.
So the more that we can make our communications robust and fact-driven, the better off we are. But it's hard, right? It's hard. We have both seen our language shaped by others for a narrative, right?
Absolutely.
And so it happens a lot, and so we're stuck with it until we change it, right?
Yeah. Well, I still see lots of value in trying to draw people's attention to the need, get to people to focus on the need to pause and reflect on, to develop a capacity to read an article or a headline, and before they click and propagate the misimpression, to think about.
Yeah, it's very valuable to do that.
Definitions. I think everyone would do well to read this. It's a 2011 Consumer's Guide to National Intelligence. And it really does explain what is done and why. I don't think a lot of what I see here has changed that much from this point, unless
the only thing that would have changed would be structural. I mean, we have added at least one intelligence agency to that graph. And so, but 2011, I was in the intelligence community when this came out. I remember it coming out. Mm-hmm. It's helpful for even analysts to read this. So, is
there sort of a recipe book? When you're writing one of the strategic reviews or a threat report, is there a book?
There is. When I was, when I went into the National Intelligence Council, I went through training, given handbooks. So in principle, analysts have these materials at their disposal. There is even a Wikipedia in the classified system where you can look up anything and have it within seconds. And so all of that is there. And by and large, agencies are quite good at, ensuring that kind of analytic integrity is there. I've seen poor analysis by analysts. I've seen that be written, but on the other side, when it comes out, it usually the system has greatly helped and greatly improved and really fine-tuned, the things like the confidence levels and made sure that language wasn't too loose and things like that. So the intelligence community, has this really remarkable ability to quality control. That said, sometimes things get out that, you know, I have a suspicion that 10 years from now, people will look at this, this particular report and think, well, maybe we should have paid a little bit more attention to the scientific community versus the intelligence sources. That's just a suspicion.
Or at least to bolster that capacity to
Right.
normalize having a balance there,
Right.
so that those in the room who have the convenient arguments that fit longstanding narratives aren't sort of always dominant.
Right. Right.
Newsrooms, again, newsrooms have the same. I'm thinking back to, oh my God, anthrax.
Oh, yeah.
I was in the science desk at the Times in 2001. 2001, right?
Yep, 2001.
When anthrax was being mailed in, there was evidence emerging that it was not a state, that it was not sophisticated. It was not like the anthrax you would get from a lab in advanced.
Right.
But that was dominated again. The internal dynamics of the newsroom, where most of the lead editors are have a political experience, was, oh well, it has to be, Iraq.
Right.
And those of us doing the science reporting were like, well, what about this? What about this? But it was literally just not registering, and what ended up on the front page. And that dynamic probably, it sounds like it's somewhat parallel to what you're describing.
I do. I think that's a really good example. I don't think about that one. I was a civilian at the time, but I think, there are the assessments that are made in the moment, which the intelligence community is required to do. There's quite a bit of caution to rush to judgment. But intelligence reporting can be fodder for that. As we are watching, this is when you read the report from ODNI on this pandemic, nothing really new has emerged. There has been no change in the consensus of the IC.
Right.
There has been no change in, especially the ODNI and the National Intelligence Council, right? That would be news. That would be newsworthy, right? But there has been no real change, except this one agency, right? And so, I don't know what the provenance of their new information is, since DOE is not an intelligence gathering, agency. So, that is another question that I think bears, scrutiny. What is this information that you have that has changed your assessment? And the CIA hasn't changed theirs, and the National Intelligence Council. It's just there's one might say that this is pushing a narrative, or one might say this is uncharacteristically sloppy reporting for these reporters who are generally good. So
yeah, well, we're always there to amplify that front page thought. That's kind of our role, unfortunately, and it's really hard to build into, here's the story again. I just want to go to that low confidence. So the Energy Department's conclusion is a result of new intelligence, and as you said, is it intelligence if it comes from the Energy Department? Significant because the agency has considerable scientific expertise. We don't know what led into this analysis.
Yeah, I mean, that word intelligence is not used the way that we would use it, right? Right. Intelligence usually implies, classified. And so, I mean, maybe it's right. I don't know. But, if it's not new, and it doesn't sound like it is, it sounds like it's new to the Wall Street Journal, maybe, but you know, I'm not sure I know when this update was published,
Right.
but anyway, it's I have questions that it's fresh intelligence.
Yep. And again, just to remind folks, go back to the definitions. The foundational definition. A low confidence level generally indicates that the information used in the analysis is scant, questionable, fragmented, or that solid analytical conclusions cannot be inferred from the information, which I assume is one reason the other agencies haven't immediately shifted their stances.
Right. And I think it's important to point out there is no lower level. Right.
Yeah.
That's the bottom. That's the bottom. Right.
There was someone on Twitter who just said there should be zero confidence.
Right. Well, then you don't make the statement.
Right.
You don't make the statement at all. So.
Yeah. So here's someone on Twitter saying, "So show me the facts. Show me." This is one of the issues. Terry Stadika. So show me the facts. Show me your facts, or are you just pushing the idea? What's your sense of that? You know, that's one of these. Is this until China shifts its transparency? I go back to these. These are the sort of the unmoving, the sort of durable findings from that ODNI report. And one of them is Beijing's lack of cooperation.
Yeah.
So that's something that can change theoretically, right?
It could. But you know, China, this isn't just COVID. I mean, China is like this on a great many, if not most issues. And so I think this is why, you know, it makes the point on origins. It's not diagnostic of either hypothesis because this is China.
Right.
And so, you know, I think the other thing that's missing, and you have it on this, from this conversation, you have it on this slide, is that all of these groups in the IC have agreed that it was not developed as a biological weapon and that it was not genetically engineered. And so the people who are pushing the lab leak hypothesis don't seem to care about those 2 points, right? And so, you know, it's selective, you know, reading of this report, and but you know, again, it's my last discussion of this topic with folks from the intelligence community. You know, they were doubtful that they would ever get information that would nail it either way. Right. And they were, they believed that those answers would arise out of the scientific community rather than some kind of, you know, magic bullet, you know, classified report, because that's not how intelligence works, right? And you know, if they don't have it now, it's unlikely it'll ever come in.
Right. So there we are. Don't expect these debates to fade fast. And this takes me again back to the vital need to look forward, even as this vital question of what happened proceeds. You know, getting to some reality here is really important. But I'd say shifting to the what lies ahead, both in terms of emerging risks like the avian flu, and to the ongoing repercussions from the this global health emergency, which has not lost that definition yet from the WHO, is really vital. So I hope, Rod Schoonover, thanks for being on the show again.
Thank you.
Let's hope that this report by the National Intelligence folks gets into the foreground as well. Economic and national security implications of the pandemic through 2026 and beyond. You know, we have to have that vigilance and preparedness for not just the virus reemerging, but for the all the different repercussions going forward. Rod, anyone can find Rod at twitter.com/Rod Schoonover, SCHOONOVER, or just Google for his name. And I'll write up some of this on Sustain What, the webcast, the dispatch. Thanks for popping up, Rod. This was just out of the blue, but it's important to get at these realities. I'm glad you're out there working on it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.